Thank you for standing by and welcome to the EHR4CR Network Role of the Governing Institute conference call. I'd now like to hand the conference over to your first speaker today, Matt Sundgren. Please go ahead.
Thank you, and welcome all of you to this EHR4CR webinar. My name is Matt Sundgren, and I'm the coordinator for EHR4CR working for AstraZeneca. This webinar has a duration of 1 hour. And as listed for the webinar, all is on mute. You can use the Q&A button during this webinar, and we will be able to answer your questions at the end of the webinar. This session is also being recorded for the purpose to be shared on our webpage. So, the overview of today's webinar is actually to have Professor Deepak Kalra, the coordinator and scientific lead of EHR4CR as a center stage today, talking about the governance role of the Institute, which is part of one of the deliverables from the project, which is the European Institute for Innovation Through Health Data. Before letting Deepak coming in and talking about the Institute, I will bring some of the listeners up to speed about the project and the overview of the platform services and the objectives. We will secure that to have an ample time for Q&A in the end of the webinar. Andrea Schmidt, which you also see here as a deputy coordinator from Hoffmann La Roche, will not be able to join you today. So going into the first sort of very brief overview of the project, EHR stands for Electronic Health Records for Clinical Research, is as part of the IMI program, Innovative Medicines Initiative, and it is focused on the capability of reuse electronic health records data for optimizing clinical trials. It's one of the largest European public-private partnership in this area. It's a 4-year project, and we have been granted extension for the 5th year for making the transition not only to a commercial sustainable platform, but also to the establishment of the Institute, which will be the focus of today's talk. The project consists of 35 participants and consists of 10 pharmaceutical companies, 11 hospital sites, and a number of very knowledgeable academic partners in Europe. Very important for the project has been the 11 hospital sites across different European member states in order to demonstrate that the services can be cross-border. The project deliverables consist mainly on 2 things. One, on the left-hand side, you see the technical platform, which is a set of tools and services. The 3 services that has been the focal point for the project has been protocol feasibility services, patient identification and recruitment services, and the 3rd one, which is aimed to support clinical trial data exchange. The other important deliverable is a business model and secure that the solutions that is part of the R&D project will have a sustainable future after the project termination. That consists also of a business model which in essence provide the guidance of how these services can take a commercial form and how the different stakeholders providing data and running the services and can be connected, and the kind of financial models and so on. Deepak will on this, and in this sustainability area, the Institute will play a very important role. The EHR technical platform is based on an open architecture and also based on previous advancement of many of the excellent academic partners coming into the EHR project in 2011. It is a service-oriented architecture. It is standard-based and a maximum service decoupling. So we would we have taken the measures to avoid vendor lock-in. It is a central platform, and then on the left-hand side you see the hospital back-end side where we have developed platform modules that provide the data exchange and actually querying through a very intricate information model where we have a number of data elements that allow us to search data through EHRs in a trustworthy and secure way, independent of different EHR systems. This is a screenshot of the interface, the user interface, the interface that the end user can see. What you see here for protocol feasibility, what you see is a screenshot where you can, on one of AstraZeneca's oncology studies, on the left-hand side you can see the different data elements that you build up the inclusion-exclusion criteria, which you see on the center of the screen. On the right hand of the screen, you can see the output from one of the participating hospitals where you see the patient counts referring to parts of that protocol. Part of the business model and the work that we have done is also to provide simulation assessment of whether these services, scalable services of EHR4CR, have a cost benefit. We also have done business model simulation. This has been the central topic for our previous webinar, which you find linked through our website. But the actual results of these different aspects of the business model simulation provides the clear indication that all the EHR4CR services do have a very favorable cost-effective condition compared to current practice. So this slide presents a snapshot where we are now. The project is in its project graduation phase right now in 2015. Over the next part of the year, we will have, as I said before, the kind of deployment activities, which contains about sort of setting up the institute, but also to finalize the testing that we have done. We are also very glad that we have a first service and platform provider, which has taken on one of the existing partners in the project, which is Custodix. So for this year and the next coming year, we will our intention is to build up these ecosystem about the different stakeholders and bring more hospitals to the platform and bringing the services that we have done in the R&D perspective into a commercial phase. And this will bring the completely innovative and unique solutions from the project. And that is to say that we have a platform and then we have service provider. This different service provider can take on different hospitals, and for example, the ASP protocol feasibility, this will allow the opportunity to have many hospitals to be connected to the platform in a sustainable way. This will bring the capability of actually giving valid, important input of real data into clinical studies to validate and provide the maximum ability to validate the design of protocols in a minute, sort of in a real time. That kind of solution, I claim that kind of solution doesn't exist today. So the network, very shortly on the network, is that the project has gone from an R&D perspective, is now changing focus to take the solutions, take the R&D platform into a commercial platform. As I said before, Custodix is the first service provider and also the first platform provider. As part of that is also the very important role of the Institute, which you soon will hear more about. This will be a very important step for actually taking the project into a real reality. This picture here just would like to illustrate that we could have many platform providers, and we could have many service providers connecting many hospitals into the platform. This will provide the true opportunity of actually creating a scalable solution of getting data into different EHR services in a trustworthy way. Previously, we have also talked about that all the solutions that EHR4CR has developed is in compliance with the data security and the different regulations that we have in Europe. The Champion program, just to say something short about that, is the kind of programs that we are expecting to launch together with the first service provider, and that is actually for the pharmaceutical part, is to get more hospitals, getting new hospitals to the commercial platform and running real services tailored to focal studies and protocols with the participating companies. Champion programs, therefore, is something that is outside the project and will be the first important step of actually doing and running commercial services on the EHR platform and the EHR ecosystem. So with that very short introduction, I will hand over the speaker to Deepak Kalra from Eurorec. So please, Deepak, the floor is yours.
Mats, thank you very much for giving everybody an orientation into the project as a whole, which leads very nicely into what I'm going to speak about. My name is Deepak Kalra, and I'm a Professor of Health Informatics at University College London and also University of Ghent. But my main role is the President of Eurorec, which is the co-coordinator alongside Mats, representing the public partners in the consortium. So let me tell you about this institute, but starting really from why it exists. Mats, thank you very much for driving the slides since I can't take control. Thank you very much. So let's start by saying that a really important observation that we have made over the last few years is that e-research or clinical research is struggling to address certain problems that have an overlap with some of the problems and challenges that healthcare is needing to address. They look different on this slide, and that's deliberate. For clinical research, really building on the things that Mats has said, there is a need from within pharma, but also academic studies, to optimize how clinical research is undertaken, in particular to achieve faster and more accurate patient identification so that clinical trials can proceed more quickly, which in turn means identifying which sites have access to the most suitable patients, and that in turn means that the protocol that is being used to identify patients is well tuned to the availability of patients in the world. There is also a lot of interest in real-world data. The term itself is a bit of a hype because the kind of data that we mean by real-world data is operational healthcare data. In fact, the data that's referred to on the right hand of this slide, but it's come into focus more sharply within pharma recently under this term real-world data. Cutting to the chase, though, there is a need to study novel medicines that have been validated in a clinical trial in real populations when one goes from patients with very clean and crisp morbidity profiles to the reality of patients with multiple chronic diseases that cross-react and clash. One needs to study novel medicines in the real world and check on their effectiveness, safety, and possibly fine-tune the way they're used. You all know that regulators increasingly wish to see comparative effectiveness, evidence of how a new product exceeds the capability of what's already in the market and delivers cost effectiveness. Clearly you're aware also of the need to monitor long-term safety, and most of you may know what adaptive licensing means, but it's where a product may be very new and on the basis of initial trial results is granted a license within a particular scope for example, a particular indication or a particular patient subpopulation, and then as observational data evidence grows, that licensing remit can be extended to broaden its coverage in real-world use. Now, healthcare has been investing in e-health solutions for a long time, recognizing the importance of the electronic health record to improve quality and safety of care, coordination of care, to use electronic health records and algorithms, tools, and care pathway systems to improve adherence to clinical evidence and to follow guidelines better, reduce errors and treatment delays. There is a very new expanding role for patients. Delighted to say that we are moving towards a time when self-care, health maintenance, wellness, and so on are becoming important, and e-health tools can be very empowering. We also want to learn from health data in healthcare as well as pharma wanting to learn for research, and that includes things like optimizing care pathways and collating evidence for decision-making. However, when we bring these together, the real opportunity is going to lie in accessing and combining health data from diverse sources. But you probably all know on this webinar that there are a number of bottlenecks that make that extremely difficult to achieve in practice and at scale. The next slide takes us to just summarizes the key areas of challenge that we're focusing on at the moment. And these 4 areas are actually in common between research and healthcare. Interoperability is a big problem area where you know already we have many diverse health systems in practice, electronic health records in primary, secondary care with different information architectures, different terminology systems and data structures. Those have to be brought together and harmonized if we're going to be analyzing data at scale. We need to know about the provenance of the data. When we suck data out of source systems and put them into our analytics environments, we still need to know where the data came from, what trust we can have in it. Not just basic data quality, like were fields completed, but what expertise lay behind clinical judgments that were made. You will all be aware that data security, privacy, and ethics are uppermost in the minds of many stakeholders right across Europe and globally. And so we need to take proactive approaches to how we will ensure patient privacy is retained and all applicable legislation is complied with when we bring EHR data into a common analytic frame of reference. And lastly, but not least, it is really important that projects such as EHR4CR and also other projects that I'll mention later don't just undertake activities that last for 2, 3, 4 years and vanish, which has been unfortunately the history of R&D. We need solutions increasingly to connect with each other, to be scalable at a European level or broader than Europe, and to be sustained over time, because any adopting community, such as the pharma industry, but such as healthcare, need to know that they are placing their future strategy in a direction that will last and not fizzle out. Next slide, please. When we look at those bottleneck areas and how they need to be tackled, we came to the view that it was best to house the future direction of travel and the cross-stakeholder momentum into a new not-for-profit institute. We thought hard about whether there were any existing bodies that would serve this purpose, but decided it was best to create a new institute that would have as its remit focusing on coordinating, accelerating solutions that would support e-health and clinical research, building best practices and sustaining the efforts made to get benefit from health data to optimize health and wellness. This institute has now been registered. I'm proud to say we actually formally registered it legally. It's a not-for-profit organization, and we have a business model and a business plan that is going to support the sustainability of this institute through a portfolio of membership fees, services such as certification and governance, and not mentioned on this slide, also sponsored projects and activities that we would undertake, which are in line with the mission of this organization. Next slide, please. A critical success factor for this institute is to bring multiple stakeholders together. The bottlenecks that I described are not easily solved by any one stakeholder. Indeed, it is the complexity of the problem space that means they have so far not been well addressed at all. Things like semantic interoperability and having well-constructed, trustworthy solutions for analyzing heterogeneous health data at a European level are two example areas that have not yet got great solutions out there. And I'm not going to read this slide. You will recognize, I'm sure, many of these stakeholders as people that you touch with, as well as stakeholder groups that you are part of. These solutions can only happen and be societally acceptable if multiple stakeholders co-create those solutions. And so this institute's USP almost is that it will bring together the stakeholders to co-create a way forward and break through these bottleneck areas so that we can make great uses of health data in the future. Next slide, please. What do I mean by health data? So one of our core functions is to facilitate the deriving and using of intelligence from health data. And health data has many shapes and forms, and I've referred earlier to electronic health records, but you know that there are many kinds of health data or health-related data that may need to be brought together into an analytics form, and that will increasingly include citizen-sourced data, that is data that they enter through web forms on computers and smartphones and tablets, but it will increasingly include data captured through wearable devices. Many health systems are integrating better their social care with healthcare, and so part of what we will consider to be therapeutic interventions in the future will include social care interventions, physical and environmental and housing type interventions. And so the records of social care need to be part of our interpretation. Many countries have got disease registers of different kinds, and quite a lot of countries also have various claims and reporting databases. Many countries have also invested in, through research grants, cohort studies and biobanks. These will become increasingly important sources of data because of the high quality fidelity with which they have captured data on their study populations. And of course, there is data from the clinical research environment, which increasingly is itself being made available to healthcare, so that information known about a patient in a study can inform the clinicians, as well as clinical data captured during healthcare can inform the research side. Next slide, please. In constructing the institute, we have taken as our starting point a project like EHR4CR, but not in isolation. Many of us are connected with a number of other projects, and this slide is just a brainstorm. It's a storm of logos, but what I would like to do is just briefly inform you that another very important project whose results are contributing to semantic health, to this institute, is Semantic Health Net. That's a project that I coordinate that is in the e-health space and is focused on tackling the problems of semantic interoperability that I referred to in one of my earlier bottleneck slides. So the solutions, but also the community of interest who want to tackle this are part of what we bring into this institute, because clinical research can only in the end make best uses of real-world data that are of a good enough quality to interpret. And so we need to parallelize our efforts between e-health and e-research to ensure that health data is of the best possible quality it can be. ENIF is another large-scale IMI project in the same family as EHR4CR, but focusing on the real-world data aspects as opposed to the clinical research conduct aspects from pharma. And that project is also now looking at its sustainability efforts and what things it might contribute into the Institute. I'm not going to speak to most of the other logos on the slide, you'll be pleased to know, but the next row are focused a lot on various aspects of reusing health data for research, and the lower sets of logos are focused on optimizing interoperability of eHealth through the use of standards. And so we work very closely with a number of standards bodies, both in the health space like SEN, ISO, HL7, IHDSDO, if those names mean something to you, and also with bodies like CDISC who are active in the clinical research standards space. The logo at the bottom, Value Health, is a project that I'll also be coordinating. It's going to start in another couple of months' time. And that project is looking at the business models for sustainability of investments in interoperability. So we look here to align the vested interests of eHealth with the vested interests of clinical research and look at how we can sustain investments in interoperability and scale them up across Europe. Next slide, please. How is the Institute going to be organized internally? We have identified from among the large list of stakeholders that I presented a few slides ago, a set of core stakeholder categories. So we've clustered the stakeholders into several categories who will be invited to become members of the new Institute with a membership fee that we believe will be proportionate to the ability to pay and the value from it. And that body of members will form a General Assembly and elect an Executive Board. And the Executive Board of this new Institute will itself elect its core officers and the executive staff who will run the Institute on a day-to-day basis. So on the left you see Director, CEO plus administrative staff. And one of the principles we have set for this Institute is that it is going to be lean and agile. So please don't think that this organizational chart is implying a large and expensive infrastructure to run this organization. It's the opposite. We are going to reuse a number of facilities that EUREC has in order to allow this Institute not to have to grow a huge staffing complement, but in fact to be able to use most of its resources to run its activities, to pay the domain experts who need to co-create the solutions we want. So that's the focus of the rest of this presentation. What are we going to do? And I think it's probably best to jump straight to the next slide, Max, if you don't mind. Because what we have done is divided the scope and challenge areas of the Institute into three. A set of core strategic roles and activities that the Institute will undertake on behalf of the research and eHealth worlds, and then two centers of excellence which will drill down into more detail and give special treatment to the opportunities and challenges of research uses of health data and semantic interoperability. But by being centers of excellence inside a common institute, they will often work together and tackle problems jointly. But they need their space to work with their core stakeholders on the core problems through each of them. And I'm going to just walk you through those three zones in a little more detail over the next few slides. So the next slide, please, Matt. In fact, that slide was just a jump slide, so maybe you could go straight to the next one. So the core functions of this institute, apart from its managerial functions to run the organization, elect officers and so on, which I haven't put on this slide, there are some key things it's going to deliver, and one of those is guidelines and an active promotion of best practice in the four areas that you can see on this slide, which in a way I've already covered in things I've said before. These are areas where we need to promote good practices, best practices if we can, so that we can bring public trust at a European level into the ways in which we use health data for research and also share health data to support patient care. We need to work with the standards bodies who have some degree of collaboration, but where stronger collaboration is needed. And we want to look at ways in which we can get the standards bodies to work together better around tackling problem areas that are high priorities for the critical user stakeholders. The Institute will itself advance the state of the art by facilitating knowledge discovery and working on research projects. Another very important area the Institute will address is collating success strategies and evidence of benefit. There is much more rhetoric about interoperability, much more rhetoric about real-world data than everybody is convinced of in practice. So a critical role that we've identified, a real gap out there, is to pull together the evidence that does exist to justify business cases being made for new informatics platforms and tools and services or investing in data quality. Similarly, we need to grow the evidence of what have been success strategies for scaling up. Europe has been blamed at times for having the disease of pilotitis. It is riddled with pilot projects and satellite activities that last for a few years and then fizzle out. So we really have to look at where examples have scaled up to reach national or transnational levels. How did they do it? What were the success strategies, and how can we propagate those so that others can benefit? This is all stuff, everything on this slide. I hope that we can have funding sufficiently to make everything here public domain. We would like to make this stuff available to benefit Europe without having to make these individually licensed items. And we're looking for the business models that will ensure the work is funded rather than us having to make money after undertaking the work. Next slide, please. Perhaps in the interest of time, I'll just quickly gloss over this slide. What are we doing right now? We have established the institution. We're beginning to formalize its boards. We are starting to connect with key stakeholders and stakeholder groups that we would like to become founder members of the Institute. And we are also starting to work on multimedia resources. Now, you can see here some important bullet points. We see a really important role of this institute being to promote the value of clinical research to society and the importance of health data. And so we will be investing some of our initial funding into the development of resources that can go out into the public space and help to win confidence that the reuse of their data for research can be undertaken in a privacy-protecting, well-governed way, and that high-quality scientific research can arise from their data and deliver faster medicines back to them in the marketplace, or can deliver other benefits such as the sharpening of care pathways to optimize their healthcare. Next slide, please. The Center of Excellence for Research Use of Health Data will early on establish a network of excellence to connect research sponsors and research units together. It will maintain these specifications arising out of the EHR4CR and also the specifications arising out of some of the other projects whose logos that I showed you. So the Institute will become the sustainability vehicle for the learning, the know-how, and maybe the software that has arisen from projects that are themselves going to fizzle out, so that we become the custodians and the long-term survival strategy for innovative R&D that may then be close to but not quite ready for productization. I'm going to say more about the certification activities on the next slide, so maybe, Matt, if you could jump on, please. A very important role for this institute to balance the commercial service providers is to govern the ecosystem that we establish, which Matt described earlier. So there is going to be a set of information flows and a set of components that connect research organizations to research sponsors. And we will be active in educating and training staff to ensure they are informatics competent as well as clinical research competent. In particular, when staff who may be familiar with working in very protected environments are exposed to the potential opportunities of electronic health record access, we need to be sure they understand about the rules and regulations that surround health data. We also will certify service providers, and that means the kind of objects in the middle of the slide, the companies that will run and provide the EHR4CR platform. But as Matt's indicated, there is a plug-in architecture to the platform that will allow a wide range of third-party product providers to provide added value services and plugins, and we need to certify that those are safe and trustworthy components to connect into this ecosystem, that they won't inadvertently create a security risk or allow data to be misrepresented and false inferences to be made. So this institute will have an oversight and governance role, and it will also be the recipient of any escalations of concerns that might arise from within this ecosystem, and it will have operating practices in place for how to deal with any concerns. The next slide, please. Okay, so this is a build that has not worked in transfer to the webinar format. The idea was that that pretty Gantt chart would disappear and you would read the bullets behind it. But basically, this is really the 2015 milestones for this Centre of Excellence. And what it's going to do is to focus very much on establishing this network of excellence, as I mentioned earlier. It's going to deal with collating the evidence of best practice in information governance. It will establish the oversight process for the EHR4CR environment and also develop staff accreditation measures that can allow staff who may already be accredited for clinical research to have additional accreditation for being, if you like, safe drivers of the EHR4CR environment. Let's move on to the next slide because I think that's okay. I'm sorry you can't read the bullets on that one. Now, the Centre of Excellence for Semantic Interoperability is something that may be a bit less familiar to many of you on this webinar, but there are a lot of semantic interoperability standards that need to be better developed than we have today because they're not really today delivering the extent of interoperability we need. So we have been working in parallel in projects like Semantic HealthNet on good design practices that can engage clinicians in the development of interoperability assets, how they can be quality labeled and registered so that adopting vendors can trust which ones they can really use. We are actively promoting the importance of interoperability standards to health insurers, health ministries, and to the vendor community, because we still see standards adoption being sluggish compared to the opportunity that standards offer interoperability and data quality. We will be working with standards developers and bringing together a multi-stakeholder community around the priorities for next generation standards development, because we have at the moment a rather, unfortunately, somewhat indiscriminate and rather random way in which standards sometimes get developed, and we would like to ensure that the prioritization of future standards in semantic interoperability is driven by stakeholders who can assert the top priorities for safety and quality of patient care. Finally, the tools that we will be developing for semantic harmonization are also going to be used for the clinical research environment. How can we support terminology cross-mappings so that data can be interpreted even if it's been collected by multiple terminology systems and multiple EHR systems? Next slide, please. So this slide is a diagram that perhaps illustrates the way this Centre of Excellence will work. So starting from the left, it will work with a number of critical stakeholders, but in particular the EU member states and the European Commission and those on the ground delivering healthcare, to develop a series of prioritized use cases and a roadmap of these, and map these into the rather vast but a bit confusing collection of interoperability standards that exist. And we'll also identify gaps in what exists. So in particular, we often have gaps in terms of legal and contractual standards, so that procurers don't really know how to purchase interoperable solutions, and we may well develop standard templates that can be used by purchasers so that they can more easily procure high-quality interoperable solutions. We will combine these assets against the use cases into bundles and then look at how they can translate into scale-up, adoption strategies and incentives, business models, and then also standards and implementation and deployment roadmap. In the end, our goal is to develop scale-up strategies and evidence of value to fuel investments in better quality and better interoperable e-health solutions. We believe that although this seems like it's targeting value for e-health, we absolutely believe that if e-health can be motivated to collect better data and form itself into a rich learning health system, that this will in turn feed the evidence needed from real-world data that also supports all aspects of clinical research. This is an absolute win-win diagram, and we are really committed to making it happen. The next slide is another one of those where the thing has failed. So what I'll do is say that I've said enough about semantic interoperability. Let's move on, Matt, please, to the next slide, which is really to do with the visibility of this institute in the outside world. As I've said before, there's a rather limited grasp in society of how health data is useful. And as a consequence, the anxieties about privacy protection or other anxieties fuel the clampdown against the use of data for research in a disproportionate way. And what we would like to do is to build the evidence up, firstly, of how health data can be used for research in a trustworthy way. Secondly, to build up the evidence of what value health data does provide to society, and how we can then help all of those stakeholders who want to use health data to develop their own value propositions and value assessment programs so that they can develop the internal business cases for investing in better ICT solutions. We want to grow, as I've mentioned earlier, a network of excellence amongst those who are motivated to collect and use good data. And although this institute is labelled as a European body, and it will start as a European body and it has a European mandate, there is almost nothing that I have said that is not relevant globally. And many of the organisations, such as clinical research organisations, such as standards bodies, are global bodies. And therefore we will work globally with counterpart organisations as we identify them, so that everything that I've said can be scaled up globally. Thanks very much. I think the last slide is a thank you slide, Matt, and that's the one we can leave up on screen to invite some questions if there are some.
Thank you very much, Deepak. Yes, we have a couple of questions. I think we can start out with one first question. Is there a plan for recruitment of some of the permanent staff for the institute, and what is the status on that? I think that was an early question, but perhaps we can say something about the plan when the institute, we had in an earlier slide, Deepak, that.
Yes, so this is to do with staffing of the institute. As I said, we're not keen to put out a whole series of post adverts and start to fill the institute with a lot of staff who will be managerial. Our belief is that we can run the institute in a lean, mean way, and we have experience with EUREC with how to do that. I believe that most of the money that we get in from membership fees and other sources of income will actually be spent on paying domain experts to work on some of those missions I described. So, for for example, when it comes to developing codes of practice and ethical guidelines on privacy protection when we're using health data for research, we will pull together, we're already working on it, but we will grow the team who are working to develop the best practices that we can find by sampling those existing codes of practice produced by a whole series of organizations and bodies, working with requirements holders, working with patient groups, working with privacy protection officers in order to work out the best way that we could drive the uses of health data in a way that is societally not just accepted, but welcomed. So that's where the money is, I think, going to go, on paying those people to work, protected time for them to meet, and so on. I'm not at this stage wanting us to start looking to recruit managerial staff.
Right. Thank you. I think a second question here is related to some of the important stakeholder groups that we have for the Institute, and that is data providers or hospitals. So I actually combine two questions, Deepak.
Okay.
What is the kind of involvement we can expect from the hospitals? Both the question address the existing hospitals from the EHR4CR project, and also how hospitals could be involved in general. I think that will be the combination of two questions in one.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'll make a start on that, and maybe I could ask Martin, who is on the call as well, if you could just stand by to see the things I say and bring in all the things I forget to say, and also add your perspective. But initially what I would say is that EHR4CR as a project benefits hugely from these 11 hospitals that Matt's mentioned at the beginning of this webinar. They have not just been data sources. All we needed was their database for that. What we actually wanted was the organizations and the people in them. They've helped us to work out what is acceptable, what is desirable, how best we can organize connecting into the hospital to obtain access to their data in a way that meets their internal privacy needs, and also which is comfortable to the investigators working in those hospitals. They've been great also at looking at things like data quality and how we can identify the data items that are most meaningful. And what I'm in danger of doing is describing the role that Martin has fulfilled in this project, which has been tremendous with his colleagues. But what we are now doing through the Champion program that Matt's alluded to earlier is we are working with some of those early adopter pharma companies to put into practice some of that protocol feasibility and recruitment activity that the tools support, and to invite those pharma companies to help us identify some hospitals they are most eager to work with. And so the second wave of hospitals will be a prioritized list, which is not based on whether the hospitals are any good, but really based on whether they are the ones that those particular companies have a relationship with and can help us to work with most quickly. But what we are then looking for is a further wave of hospitals to expand our network and grow to European level, because really the success of this platform will be scaling up across Europe. And we know there are some fantastic hospitals that may already have quite good internal information systems and would love to plug into a European cooperative environment. We look forward to working with those over time. Martin, is it okay if I hand over to you to say anything further that you would like to say, but also to throw in a thank you for you and all of the work you've done in the project?
Thank you very much indeed, Deepak. Actually, there's not much to add from my end here. I think the question relates to how might hospitals also be involved in the activities of the Institute. And I think from a hospital perspective, it is important that all these data access activities are performed in a trustworthy way and according to generally accepted standards. And so here, I think the role of the hospitals is to bring in their local rules and regulations, and also use the certification activities so that a hospital can be sure if a certain solution is certified by this independent institute, that it is really okay to connect your system to this network. So I think that's a very important role of this institute here.
Yes, thank you, Martin. That's a very important set of messages. Thank you for that. Matt, so I'll hand back to you. Are there any other questions?
Yes, absolutely. I'm keen that we can cover two questions before we end this webinar. And the first one is combining them. Will the Institute own and product manage the platform, the EHR4CR platform, for the years to come? If not, who will? And if we combine that question also with the touch that we can reveal some clarity about the member fees and ad hoc service fees. And I can just begin to clarify to say that the service provider, there can be more than one platform service provider, and it can be many platform providers, and it can be many service providers. Those will be the provider of services that will take fees of actually running the service, not the institute. Would you agree on that, Deepak?
Yes, so I think there is, yes, you're right, there's an important difference to be made, and it is deliberate, but we thought very hard, and the question is well meant. We put a lot of thought into how we would partition the sustainability framework. And what we want to do as an institute is to make sure that we have control over what the core functions and protections are in the platform. And therefore, the Institute will hold the specifications for the platform that can be made available to any vendor. On the other hand, we don't want the Institute to become a slow and cumbersome way of delaying innovation in this field. And so we're very happy that the actual operating platform will be run by a company. The first company, Custodix, as you mentioned, Mats, but in the future, potentially, there will be other platform implementations that may be run by different providers, and that those will be responsible for implementing the specification, conforming to our certification rules. And therefore, what we have, I believe, is a healthy balance between the specifications and the guardian of quality and function, which is the Institute, and the innovation space, which is corporate. And as you said, Nats, anybody, for example, a research sponsor like a pharma company, would pay for the services provided by the platform service provider. It would pay to use the platform to run clinical trials, but it would also pay a membership fee for the Institute, because we believe that those member categories I showed earlier would all find value in the Institute and would be willing to pay to join it. Now, having mentioned earlier that the membership fees are largely anticipating to go not on an expensive infrastructure, but on doing real work, I would like people on this webinar to think of membership fees not in the way that you subscribe to a lot of other organizations in your professional and private life, but you're kind of sponsoring the activities of the Institute. You're paying for it to do work that you want it to do and results you want to benefit from. And by having that democratic organizational chart, we will retain a listening ear to our members to know what are the contemporary bottlenecks the Institute should tackle.
Thank you, Deepak. I would like to add also that we have been thinking in the lines of that in order to operate within the ecosystem, you need to be a member of the Institute, and therefore also that we have been thinking of that hospitals will actually have a number of value propositions of just being a member, because that will sort of provide them as important potential principal investigators. So that is just one. Just before we close, I think that we have a very practical question, sort of if we can say something about describe the certification process for data providers. So Deepak, if you can say something about that. We have been thinking quite a lot of that. So that will probably be our last question.
Okay. I think our wish is that we know that hospitals today have variable data quality, and we know that they are still heading towards integrated systems, and therefore our approach in the early stages is not going to be to set a bar that's really high and makes it very difficult for a hospital to provide data. So our view is quite the opposite. We want to try to help hospitals to provide their data to the platform, but we will set some very basic minimum standards around the ways in which they ensure the privacy protection has taken place when they populate an EHR4CR warehouse at their sites. We will want to ensure that they are of a reasonable data quality for the number of data items that we need, so that we don't have erroneous and misleading results. And also we need to be satisfied that the hospital is indeed in the position to play the role of recruiting patients should they be found. Those are the main categories of quality that we'll be looking for hospitals to demonstrate.
Right. Thank you. I think we reached the hour now. So just one thing that I would like to clarify. I think it has been said before in the ecosystem that we are starting off now in our deployment year with the champion programs, where we have the opportunity to have one first platform provider and one first service provider. In order for this to be scalable, and that is what our clear intent is, that we need many local service providers that can connect to a platform provider, and potentially in the years to come, many platform providers. That is also some very important scalability principles for those who actually took the leverage and use the health data. With that, me and Deepak and Marlin would like to thank you, and Martin will thank everybody on the webinar for participating. We will answer all the questions in text and send out to you together with the recorded link, because there are some incoming questions that we have not been able to answer. Do you want to say something, Deepak, before we close the webinar?
No, just briefly perhaps to thank everyone as you've done for participating, and also say that we would like you to think about what it would take for your organization to become a member of the Institute. We want multiple stakeholders to join, and so we really would like a diverse and representative group of members early on. I know we haven't discussed the fees, but just irrespective of that, what would it take? Are you excited? Does your organization want to join? We'd love to know.
Absolutely. So with that, thank you very much, and goodbye.
That does conclude the conference for today. Thank you for participating. You may now all disconnect. Speakers, please stand by.